The House of Black. One of the most ancient, powerful, and insufferably snobbish dynasties of the wizarding world. But among all the illustrious, pure, and fanatically proud figures on this family tree, there's one that stands out like a lightning bolt in a stormy night. Sirius Black III. Or, as he preferred to call himself, Padfoot, the family's rogue dog. This is the story of a boy who chose to reject his destiny and forge his own path. And let's be honest, Andromeda was definitely rooting for him. But don't get me wrong, Sirius was no saint. Oh no. He was one of the most talented, and let's admit it, most mischievous students Hogwarts has ever seen. Does the name Marauders ring a bell?
In the shadowed halls of Wizarding Britain, few names carry such cold weight as the House of Black. An ancient dynasty, their bloodline claimed unbroken since the Middle Ages. Pure, powerful, untouchable. To the Blacks, purity wasn't just tradition. It was law. A legacy carved deep into their bones, whispered with each new birth. Toujours pur. Always pure. Among pure blood families, they were royalty, proud and unyielding. Untainted by Muggle blood, they stood above all others. But behind the grandeur of their manor walls, behind the silken tapestries and formal grace, lay a darker truth. By the 20th century, the Blacks, like many noble lines, had learned to rewrite their own history, erasing Muggleborns, squibs, and anyone who dared dilute their blood. Names vanished, faces were forgotten. Blood was cleansed from the family tree with ruthless precision. Their obsession with purity twisted love and reason. Cousins married cousins, binding blood like a sacred flame, one that could never be diluted, no matter the cost. Orion and Walburga Black were no exception, bound not by passion, but by pedigree, a union as cold and precise as the creed they upheld. Orion Black was born in 1929, the only son of Arcturus Black and Melania Macmillan, heir to a long and venerable bloodline. His childhood was steeped in the silent pride of old money and older traditions, raised beneath the stern portraits of ancestors whose eyes still judged from beyond the grave. At Hogwarts, he was sorted, as expected, into Slytherin House, the cradle of ambition and legacy. There, he honed not only his magic, but the quiet arrogance instilled in him since birth, the belief that the world belonged to those of the right blood, and that the old ways had been forgotten by too many, too quickly. In his youth, Orion, like many of his relatives, quietly supported the ideology of Gellert Grindelwald, whose meteoric rise during the 1930s ignited hope among purist families across Europe. Though the House of Black never pledged allegiance, many regarded his crusade with reverent fascination, believing he might be the visionary the wizarding world needed, someone capable of restoring order and reaffirming the cosmic hierarchy between Muggles and wizards. But in 1945, Grindelwald fell, and with the end of the global wizarding war, the dream of restoring the magical world to its former glory crumbled, scattered into the hush of the wind, a hush that had not yet spoken its final word. It was around this time that Walburga Black, born 4 years before Orion, emerged as his destined match. A devout traditionalist from her youth, she was the daughter of Pollux Black and Irma Crabbe, and a proud descendant of a line that viewed itself as the pinnacle of wizarding civilization. Like her brothers, Cygnus and Alphard, she was sorted into Slytherin, where she thrived in an atmosphere of superiority and tradition. But unlike many of her peers, still haunted by Grindelwald's legacy and growing more open to tolerance, Walburga remained unshaken. To her, the preservation of blood purity was not opinion. It was sacred. She had always known her future. Walburga did not dream of romance or rebellion. She dreamt of preservation, of continuing the Black name, intact and eternal. She waited patiently for Orion to complete his education, their engagement understood, if never announced. Their marriage, sometime in the 1950s, was less a union of souls than a ritualistic binding of bloodlines, an act of duty cloaked in the language of tradition. Together, they assumed their rightful place as patron and matron of the noble and most ancient House of Black. Their residence, number 12 Grimmauld Place, stood not merely as a home, but as a monument, austere, imposing, saturated in enchantments and legacy. Hidden within an ordinary street in Islington, the house remained concealed from unworthy eyes, protected by spells of immense power. Within those grand yet stifling walls, the next chapter of the Black lineage began, beneath stars that had guided their family for generations. For the House of Black did not name its children lightly. Across centuries, its sons and daughters had borne the names of stars and constellations, celestial bodies thought to reflect the purity and permanence of their bloodline. Each name was both symbol and prophecy, binding the child not only to the heavens, but to the heavy weight of legacy. And so, on the 3rd of November 1959, their firstborn was named Sirius, after the brightest star in the night sky.
Did you know that exclusive Spellbook Chronicles booklets are now available? Ancient volumes filled with secrets just like the ones hidden in the restricted section. But instead of hiding from Madame Pince, all you need is a click. This Muggle technology is amazing. Each booklet contains one of the most beloved stories from the series, enriched with exclusive images. So, what are you waiting for? Start collecting them all. Your support is invaluable. Not only will you enjoy the magic, but you'll also be supporting the channel, allowing us to keep bringing you the most amazing stories, like the one in this episode. So, enjoy the show.
You will carry the name.
From the moment he was born, Sirius Black was destined to be the heir of his house. Before he could even read, lessons on blood purity and magical supremacy filled his days. Under the stern gaze of his mother, Walburga, and the icy silence of his father, Orion, Sirius was introduced not just to the magic they prized, but to its darkest corners. Dark magic wasn't feared in the Black household. It was studied, dissected, mastered.
Remember, Sirius.
To them, true power meant knowing every shadow the Ministry warned against. Only the weak feared power. Only the blind obeyed. But Sirius carried a storm in his bones, something wild that didn't belong in the polished parlor or the family tapestry. As a child, he slipped past wards and Creature, the surly house elf, to vanish into the streets of Muggle London. Not out of rebellion yet, but curiosity. The rattle of buses, the hum of traffic, the neon lights, the strange magic of cinema. It was loud, messy, alive. Unlike the stillness of Grimmauld Place, the Muggle world moved. He spent hours watching people who didn't know his name and wouldn't care if they did. Motorcycles, headlights, posters of actors with smiles like freedom. It was a different kind of magic. Only one family member knew. His cousin Andromeda, a few years older, sharp-tongued and burning with the same quiet defiance. She didn't judge him. She shared it. At dinners, they traded smirks, passed notes, whispered of other lives, other names, other futures. They didn't belong, and for a time, they didn't need to. They had each other. But where Andromeda was a question, her sister Bellatrix was a sentence. Her loyalty to the family creed was absolute. She was proud, merciless, and entirely committed to the doctrine of purity. Where Andromeda entertained dreams, Bellatrix enforced discipline. She watched them, always. She told. She reminded them, loudly, coldly, of what the Blacks were and what they were not. Seasons passed. When Andromeda left for Hogwarts, Sirius waited for summer with a strange ache. And so, it was Regulus who stepped into the quiet. 2 years younger, his little brother had once trailed Sirius's every step, eyes wide with adoration, copying his movements, repeating his words, hanging on every tale. He had been earnest, bright, eager to please. But the House of Black had no use for innocence. Regulus changed. He stopped asking questions, stopped sneaking into Sirius's room at night. He learned to mimic their parents, precise, graceful, cold. The son the house could be proud of. The boy destined to sit at the head of the table and call it destiny. Sirius was something else, a force of nature. His magic was wild, raw, unsettling. Even among the proud blacks, his power stood out. No one's seen talent like that since Bellatrix, someone whispered once. Sirius heard. He always did. Not for praise, but for proof. Proof that he was more than their chains. Regulus became his mother's pride, Sirius her shame. The stray dog at the feast's edge, teeth bared, defiant. While Creature muttered and Walburga shrieked, Sirius grinned, that crooked, infuriating grin. Their fury didn't scare him, it amused him. Their obsession with control made them small. Small could never be great, and greatness would never own him. But everything was about to change. Hogwarts, distant, whispered, was no longer far away. It was the 1st of September, 1971, and when the sorting hat touched his head, it shouted a word no black had worn in centuries. Gryffindor! Gasps echoed through the great hall. Somewhere, a goblet dropped. Sirius stood, stiff-backed, and walked to the Gryffindor table without flinching. He didn't look at the Slytherin table. He didn't need to. The stares of his family burned hotter than any curse.
Gryffindor.
To them, it wasn't just a disgrace.
Traitor.
It was betrayal. Confirmation of everything they feared he might become. But Sirius didn't care. Because at the Gryffindor table, among the sea of unfamiliar faces, he spotted one that made him grin. A boy with windswept black hair, glasses askew, and an irreverent gleam in his eye. James Potter. They'd met on the train, sharing a compartment and a contraband stash of cauldron cakes. Within minutes, they'd been laughing like old friends, mocking the prefects and speculating loudly about which rules were most fun to break. The bond had been instant, effortless, two sparks finding each other in a forest full of dry kindling. James, it turned out, came from a well-off wizarding family who had made their fortune thanks to the Sleekeazy's hair potion and scalp treatment. Welcome. Which was rather poetic, really, given that James's own hair was perhaps the most stubborn, rebellious thing about him. Apparently, some problems run in the blood, and others inspire an entire product line. If Sirius's family was scandalized, they weren't quiet about it. Letters arrived thick with disappointment and veiled threats. His mother called it a grotesque betrayal. His father spoke of legacy and bloodline like curses. But for the first time in his life, Sirius didn't have to listen. Because Hogwarts wasn't just a school, it was an escape. A castle vast enough to get lost in, ancient enough to hide things no adult could monitor, magical enough to feel like anything was possible. Its walls didn't whisper of duty or disgrace. They whispered of secrets, of laughter echoing down moving staircases, of friends waiting in corners you hadn't found yet. And Sirius was finally free to be who he was, not who he was meant to be. He and James became inseparable. Together they unraveled Hogwarts like a map made just for them. They snuck into the kitchens, befriended ghosts, invented secret codes and elaborate dares, and collected detentions like trophies. It didn't take long for their names to become a kind of legend. Brilliant, reckless, and always together. They weren't just students. They were marauders in the making. But Sirius and James weren't alone for long. There was also Peter Pettigrew. Short, round-faced, and perpetually out of breath. As if the world moved just a little too fast for him. He was the sort of boy you'd forget in a lineup. The one whose hand went half raised in class and then slowly sank again. But for all his hesitations, Peter had something that mattered. He adored them. To him, Sirius and James weren't just classmates. They were icons. Living, breathing proof that brilliance and bravery could be loud, funny, and wildly disobedient. Peter followed them like a shadow with bad posture. And while he wasn't particularly gifted with a wand, he was eager, loyal, and absolutely terrified of disappointing them. There was a sort of hunger in him, to belong, to matter. And the closer he stayed to James and Sirius, the more he felt like he did. Then there was Remus, Remus Lupin didn't seek the spotlight. In fact, he seemed to shrink from it. Quiet, bookish, always pale and a little tired, with eyes that looked older than they should.
Mr. Lupin?
He had the kind of presence you only noticed when the room went quiet.
Yes,
But Sirius noticed him.
Professor.
Everyone did, eventually. Not because he tried to stand out, quite the opposite, but because there was something behind his calm, a storm trying not to show. No one knew where he disappeared to every month.
Hiding something.
He always came back more tired, more withdrawn.
Indeed.
Excuses were made.
Sick relatives.
Sick relatives,
Colds and flus.
strange flus,
Migraines.
sudden migraines.
Not buying it.
But James and Sirius were many things, and oblivious wasn't one of them.
A werewolf.
When they figured it out, when they realized what Remus was, Sirius thought he might be scared, but he wasn't, and neither were the others.
We'll talk to him.
Instead, they laughed, called him Moony, joked about fleas, and even scratched behind his ears, teasing him, the same way Sirius and James always teased each other. It was affection, real and unspoken, their way of saying, "We're friends, all right?" For Remus, it changed everything. The full moon wasn't a secret to hide anymore. It was a night like any other, spent with friends, planning pranks instead of hiding alone. He didn't come back to silence and fear. He came back to faces that understood, to a place where he belonged. And so the four of them, Sirius Black, James Potter, Peter Pettigrew, and Remus Lupin, became something more than classmates. They became a pact, a promise. They were the Marauders now.
Ah, there you are, my beloved viewers. Fear not, I'll be quicker than a golden snitch. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here for this episode of the Spellbook Chronicles. And if you think Quentin Pendragon is charming enough to deserve your generous support, you might consider leaving a like. And I highly recommend subscribing to the channel too, clicking the bell icon to make sure you don't miss a single episode. And why not, joining the channel to get priority access to every new video for just a couple of galleons. So, what are you waiting for?
Time passed quickly at Hogwarts, as it often does when the halls echo with laughter and secrets, and the nights leave little room for sleep. Before long, Sirius's younger brother, Regulus, arrived at school. He was sorted into Slytherin without hesitation, earning silent nods of approval from their parents. It was exactly as it should have been, at least in their eyes.
Brilliant.
Sirius, meanwhile, came home for the holidays with the defiance of someone who no longer cared to hide it. His bedroom wall was soon covered in posters of Muggle pin-ups and motorbikes, wedged between Quidditch flyers that no one in the family cared about. On the shelves, rows of toy vehicles, mostly motorbikes, sat beside magazines filled with engines, speed, and smoke. His parents said nothing, but the silence that followed was never empty. It was charged, cold, and growing heavier with every passing year. At school, the divide between the brothers deepened. Blood may have bound them, but little else did. Regulus moved in carefully curated circles, boys with crisp uniforms and colder smiles, who spoke in whispers about bloodlines and loyalty. Many of them would one day wear the dark mark.
Nice friends.
Sirius couldn't have chosen a path further from that.
Come on, mate.
With James at his side, his star only burned brighter.
We've got a match to win.
The two were inseparable,
Yes, mate.
unstoppable.
Let's do this.
Gryffindor's twin comets. The school's official records are vague on the matter, but it's widely believed that Sirius played beater for the Gryffindor Quidditch team, while James was their prized chaser. Ask anyone who was around back then, they'll tell you it was true. The girls loved them. The boys either tried to compete or just moaned about them from the sidelines. One of those who complained was Severus Snape, a Slytherin boy with greasy hair, pale skin, and eyes that looked sharp enough to cut. They had met on the Hogwarts Express their very first day and clashed before the sweets trolley had even arrived. From that moment, it was animosity with no breaks. Snape was sharp, no question, and he nursed a grudge like a wounded animal. James, ever the showman, had dubbed him Snivelus, a name that clung to him like mildew and refused to wash off. Snape, in turn, made it his mission to track them down.
Insolent fool.
He lingered in the halls, always lurking, notebook in hand, ready to pounce on any slip-up. He wasn't bold enough to confront them face to face. but he never missed a chance to tip off Filch or hide behind a suit of armor to eavesdrop. He wasn't a real threat, more a persistent nuisance, unwanted, unrelenting, always there. As the years passed at Hogwarts and adolescence took its toll, lycanthropy became harder and harder for Remus to manage and to endure. To ensure his safety and that of his peers, the boy was taken to a shack each month during his transformations, locked away to prevent him from attacking other students. But that isolation slowly broke something in him. His howls of pain and rage echoed through the village of Hogsmeade, and the locals, unaware of the truth, began to believe the shack was haunted by violent ghosts.
There are ghosts.
Rather than deny it,
in the shack.
Dumbledore encouraged the rumors, and the Shrieking Shack gained its infamous reputation as the most haunted building in Britain. Back then, the Wolfsbane potion didn't exist. Every full moon was a battle Remus faced alone, a battle that left him more withdrawn, gaunt, and silent with each passing month.
Remus.
Watching this, Sirius couldn't take it anymore. Seeing his friend vanish into pain and shame, something lit inside him. A wild idea,
After all,
mad maybe,
why not?
but worth trying. What if, on full moon nights, he, James, and Peter could become animals too? Maybe then Remus wouldn't be alone. Maybe the beast inside him would feel less like a monster and more like a pack. Of course, it was almost impossible. Becoming an Animagus was a magical feat so complex that most adult wizards wouldn't even attempt it. But Sirius didn't care.
This'll be fun.
He convinced James and Peter, and together they began studying the ritual in secret. They spent 3 years hiding ingredients, whispering incantations, waiting for the right storms. One mistake could have meant disaster, but they didn't stop. Sirius was the first. One night in 5th year, he transformed into a great black dog, fast, silent, and powerful. A few weeks later, James followed, becoming a stag. Peter, after much struggling, became a rat. From that night on, everything changed. Every full moon, the 3 of them would sneak out under James's invisibility cloak, slip past the Whomping Willow, and meet Remus in the Shrieking Shack. They couldn't stop the transformation, but they could ease the pain. The wolf was still there, wild and dangerous, but it wasn't alone anymore. And so, little by little, the boy behind the beast began to return. But they didn't stop there. Once they learned to move through the grounds unseen, they started exploring. Hogwarts by night, Hogsmeade by moonlight, the forest, the hills, even the castle's deepest secrets. They memorized every trick staircase, every vanishing step, every hidden tunnel. And from that mischief, an idea was born.
A map.
A map.
Not just any.
Not just any map,
Masterpiece.
a masterpiece. Magical, sarcastic, and impossibly precise. Built using the homunculus charm and infused with their jokes and each member's unique personality, it showed every corner of the school and every person within it.
Right corner.
An enchantment of staggering complexity, and in the right hands,
Got it.
a tool as powerful as it was ingenious. When it was finished, they signed it with pride. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. That was their name now.
Padfoot.
Padfoot, yes.
Yes.
To Sirius, no name had ever felt more like him.
It's perfect.
A declaration, a legacy, a joke, maybe, but one that outlived them all. No one knows exactly how it happened, but it's said that the map was later confiscated by good old Argus Filch, likely thanks to yet another tip-off from Snape,
I swear.
who had grown increasingly obsessed with getting James expelled.
Nosy snivellers.
But none of that mattered to Sirius,
It's all right, mate.
because in the end, the real magic wasn't the map, it was them,
We've got each other.
what they'd done, what they'd become,
We're a family now.
his real family.
And so, with this episode, we've reached the end. Sirius Black was far from perfect. He was impulsive, rebellious, and often reckless. But he was also loyal, brave, and willing to sacrifice everything for those he loved. Because fighting for what you love, my dear viewers, means having the courage to make your own choices, beyond what others consider right or wrong. And we can say that, with his story, old Padfoot taught us that lesson well. Quentin Pendragon bids you farewell, and eagerly awaits you here for the next marvelous adventure.